Hey guys, this is National Master Kevin Yang back at it with another video. So this one's against Chessleonmaster. We've seen our friend before, and he's back. He's back to take another stab at it. Let's get to it. E4, knight f6. So this is the Alekhine defense. I don't bring it out much, but it's a weapon if you need to throw an opponent off, if you need to show him that you can play goofy, if you need to show him that you've got something different up your sleeve. This is something different. You let the knight get chased around. So sometimes c4, knight b6, c5, knight d5, knight c3, or bishop c4. They all work, but in general, I tend to play d4 to not overextend, because these guys are very much in territory, and black could just play e6 and d6 and try to break them. So I don't want to do that just yet. I usually, when I'm white, I play d4, right, in this position, just like Chessleonmaster has. And now d6 happens. Here I'm trying to break the center again, right? So here there are many moves, right? There's c4, as before. There's pawn takes, and there's knight f3. So c4, knight f3, and here I play g6 because I realize that, okay, well, the pawns are going to be sitting here for a while, so gotta find another way to do it. Pawn takes, and I take with the c pawn because I think about this, and I think about this, and I think about the possibility that I'm going to play e5 one day. So knight c3, I bring my pieces out, bishop g4, and after bishop e2, I think about knight c6, because now I have two attackers on the d4 pawn, and white has two defenders. But once I eliminate this defender, I can take on d4, and that's something I have to think about. d5 now, and now I make a very interesting decision. And bishop takes f3, saying, if you take on c6, I'm going to take on g2 first, and then come back to take on c6. But if you take on f3, I'm going to play knight to e5, put some threats on the c4 pawn, and maybe threaten to trade the bishop, right? So after bishop takes e5, bishop takes, queen to d3, I castle. I could have also made the decision to try to attack on the c4 pawn, right? Queen to c8 or rook to c8. But I was patient. I castled, and our friend Chessleonmaster instinctively said, I haven't castled yet, and I see a good opportunity to try to attack. And I respect that. I play queen c8. I want to attack a pawn because it's very important for me. If h5, I'm going to take on c4, right? It doesn't matter if you're trying to go hard on this side. I should be able to get through, right? If pawn takes g6, I take your queen. So you can't do anything. You have to move your queen, and I'm probably going to play many things. I could play rook to c8 and try to trade on c3, right? So there are multiple opportunities that I could do. But in the game, our friend played b3, and this is a safe move, right? This protects the pawn chain, right? Because as black, you're trying to break it, and as white, you're trying to support it. And here I play queen to f5, saying, if you take, I'm going to insert an in-between move. Bishop takes c3 with check. So the king has to move, and I'm going to take the queen. So then I'm up a knight, and I would appreciate that very much. Thank you. But our friend Chessleonmaster, of course, knows what he's doing. Rook to d1, and here I decide to play a5. And to be honest, in this position, I was considering the move bishop takes c3 because my knight has some decent squares, right? And I can combine that with a5, a4. But I ultimately decided not to do that because I thought my bishop on e5 was solid, right? I bring my knight to d7, I can bring it to c5, and now knight b5 comes. So now there might be some things with knight c7, there might be some things with bishop g4. It's getting interesting, right? Because the bishops are of opposite color, and that always tells some people to say, okay, it's going to be a draw, and that tells some people to say, ooh, maybe there might be something interesting. So I get on the c5 square, rook to e3, and at this moment I tempt my opponent to take on e7 because I want some play. Because I looked at this position and I said, well, what can I do here? I can play f5 and f4, but maybe there's knight c7 and maybe there's knight to e6. And all of a sudden I'm like, where's my advantage, right? Because if rook to c8, knight to e6, and I'm like, well, it's threatening both of my guys, so if I take, and play b6, I don't have an advantage here. I'm going to play rook c5, but I have no way of breaking through. So that's why I was like, I got to shake it up, shake and bake. Bishop f4. You play rook takes e7. I'm going to trade rooks because I want an active rook. King to d1. I said, I'm going to take on b3. If you trade with me, rook to e1, I'll say, I'm going to take and play knight to c5. Going for the pawn, right? At least I have some play here. I could have also thought about bishop d2 with the idea that I'm going to bring it to b4. If you play king c2, I'll play knight c5. We take d6. Then it might get tricky for me. But I was like, I want to keep my bishop on f4 because I like it on f4. It can go to central e5 and it might do things for me. But in the game, our friend Chessleonmaster came up with something interesting as well. g3, bishop e5, and I initially was looking at the idea of what happens after bishop g2 with the idea that white is going to play f4, right? So I was panicking here. I was like, what do I do, right? Because I don't have a clear solution. If I play knight c5, f4, bishop to f6, and knight takes d6. And I was a little bit worried here about rook to e3 and maybe rook to e1, right? Because white would get plenty of activity, then I get some pawns, but I don't know. I just felt very unsure about this position. So, but in the game, rook e1 happened. And I thought this was a pretty good move as well, right? Threatening knight takes d6 with the help of the pin on the e-file. So I decided I'm going to go into passive mode because for now my bishop and my knight are doing the active job. Rook to e2, knight to c5, rook to a2, knight to d3. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find some squeaks and kinks in white's position, right? I want to play knight to b2 with a check so I can threaten both the c4 pawn and the king. But after bishop g2, I do exactly that. And I say I'll take on c4. And here I was a little bit worried about rook to c2 because after knight to b6, I wasn't sure what happens after takes, and something like rook takes b7. I wasn't sure. I felt like it was good for me, but white has activity here. White can do a lot of things. Even f4 is something to consider, right? So It's hard to say, and I always say it's hard to say because it is hard to say. Knight takes a4, and I don't know. But our friend here played f4. I played bishop f6, rook to e2, interesting. But I would say that this move didn't quite do much, right? Because rook to e2, although it does stop knight to e3, it doesn't exactly go anywhere, right? There's no future plan for this. So what I would say is I would play bishop to f3. And the reason is because I want to maybe push h5. Because when your opponent has a dark squared bishop and you have a light squared bishop, the goal is that you want to put your pawns on light squares. That way, your opponent and your opponent's bishop will not be able to threaten the pawns. So right now, these pawns are pretty vulnerable to this bishop. The bishop can sneak behind here and maybe grab these pawns. So it's hard to say what is the best move, because in this position it's already somewhat difficult for our friend Chessleonmaster to play, but make the most of it. Rook e2, I play h5. So at this moment I was thinking, okay, well I could play king to f8 obviously, but I was a little bit worried about g4 and g5, right? I was unsure. I wasn't sure if this bishop was going to get in the game or not. And then what I missed in my calculations was this move bishop to g3, saying, if you play king to b1, I'm just going to take on f4. And rook to e4, I have knight to d2 check, right? So this was what I was missing in my calculations. I was thinking after g5, the bishop was getting shut off, and maybe white might have something with rook c2 and rook c7. That's what I was thinking in my mind. But I was wrong. So I played h5 to prevent g4 and g5. Just a prophylactic move. So a move that prevents your opponent from doing something. But after king to b1, I said I gotta do something. Knight to b6. Gotta create some threats, right? You play rook a2. I'm gonna bring my knight to c4 and rook to e2. Thinking about a repetition, but now rook to c8. I'm saying, okay, if you play any other move, I'm going to play rook to c5. I'm going to get my king over, hopefully to d7, and play knight to b6 and try to go for these two pawns, right? Because that's what I'm seeing as the weak pawns right now. So rook c2, rook c5, bishop to f1, but now knight to e3. And at this moment, after takes, our friend Chessleonmaster, I forgot. Did he resign or? I think he resigned here. No, he lost on time here. White lost on time here. And it was a really close game. I mean, if we look at the start, the opening was fine, right? It's just at this point in the game, I think the bishop belongs on e3 because we have to sort of realize that I have some good pressure coming. And what white needs to do is solidify the center. So here I was able to have some attacks and especially bringing my knight to e5. That was a big moment, right? And queen c8, I could have probably, instead of castles, brought my rook or queen on the c file to attack the pawn structure better, but I was a little bit patient, and I guess I didn't play the endgame the best, but I sort of did get away with it. Like I was able to attack the isolated pawns, and although I didn't play my best, I still had some good efforts. And in the end, I had rough seas, but I won. So, tough game, but thank you so much.